Would you please pray with me? Lord, may the words of my mouth and the thoughts of all of our hearts be pleasing and acceptable to you, for you are our rock, you're our strength, and you're our foundation. Amen. Well, this past Monday, we just finished our last evening of the Saving Grace course. This was the course that we offered and I was teaching on how to manage our financial resources in the faithful way, rather than the way of our consumer culture tells us we could or maybe even should manage our finances. We had a great time learning together over those 6 weeks, talking about our use of God's resources and creating a spending plan for how those resources would be used each month. One of the surprises was that as we talked and we began working on the spending plan, or if you prefer the word budget, for the month, the very first thing to plan was our giving, was our generosity. Plan what you're going to be giving to others, giving to the church, giving to organizations. Plan on what you're going to give before the rest of your budget. And then live within your means for the rest of the budget. Well, if you can imagine, this led to a great deal of soul searching, and that group formed together closely enough that we had very honest conversations about that. What I know is it led to a lot of discussions and many of those same homes during the time we were together. In today's scripture, we find Jesus and his disciples not unusually in the temple. If you've got a Bible, and you all do because they're in the pews in front of you if you didn't bring one, please turn to Mark chapter 12, beginning at verse 38. If you got your phone with you, please feel free to use whatever Bible app you use there. Mark chapter 12, beginning at verse 38. So as today's lesson opens, Jesus has had several run-ins with the religious leaders in and around the temple. And after those run-ins, he's talking to his disciples, and he tells them not to be like those religious leaders. Why? Well, you got to be careful of those folks who enjoy wearing their fancy religious clothing all over the place. Got to be careful of the people who, because of their position in religion, love to have people acknowledge them in the public places and display their false humility. You've got to be careful about the people who go to synagogue and sit in the best seats, which, by the way, in synagogue, if you want the best seats, you are paying for those. And everybody knows it. You need to be careful of those religious folks who like the place of honor when there's festivities, and they get those places of honor simply because they are seen as religious people. You need to be careful of those folks who are religious leaders who take advantage of people in their homes. When Jesus says those who devour the widows, the common practice of the time was that many religious leaders, especially if they travel, families would put them up in their homes. And then they would eat them out of house and home as if they deserved it. Because after all, I'm a religious muckety-muck. He says, don't do that. Be careful of them. And then after this, he says, and by the way, when you pray, watch out for those people who do long, lengthy prayers just to be noticed. The same warnings go for us. Be careful. Be careful how you practice your religion, how you practice your faith, so that you don't do it in a way to get the attention of other people or accolades from people who might notice you. Be careful. And as they sat there in the temple grounds, we read in verse 41 that Jesus sat down across from the place where the offering boxes were. And he sat and he watched. Now, let me tell you about the offering boxes. They're not the nice little wooden boxes that we've got here, or maybe the cloth-covered baskets we pass in some of our services. See, think of these as having more like long trumpets that lead into the treasury boxes. And so the coins would make a loud noise when people put them in. Obviously, the more you gave, the more noise it made. And everybody knew it. Those who were putting in gold sounds different than silver, sounds different than bronze, sounds different than copper. And everybody knew it. You know, I've wondered what was going on in Jesus' mind as he watched this. I mean, honestly, I can almost feel the weary sigh in the depths of his soul as he watched this big production being made out of giving and was playing out right in front of him. It's all about attitude. As Jesus watched, he saw many people putting their money into the temple treasury. He saw and heard the many wealthy people putting their money in. You know, as I prepared for this sermon, I read in one of my sources that in those days at the temple, it was not unusual for rich people to have a contest about how much they were giving, and would almost race to the treasury boxes to put it in so everybody could hear, and they could be the first one everybody hears. And it became a contest almost to outdo each other. But you see, they didn't care one bit about God's house or about God's treasury. It was all about being noticed for their giving. And in the midst of all of this hubbub, now there's a word I brought right out from the 1930s. In the midst of all of this hubbub, a poor widow makes her way to those boxes, almost as a counterpoint to the clinking and the clanking of those large gold and silver coins being tossed in the boxes. We hear a plink, plink, as she puts her two small copper coins in. Hardly anybody would have even heard it. I mean, compared to the clank of gold and the clink of silver, the plink of copper sounds honestly pathetic. And the amount of those two small coins would hardly have been even worth picking up off the sidewalk. One estimate I read said that in today's terms, they would have been worth about 4 cents, is all. But here's the strange part. As she dropped them in, Jesus said to whoever would listen to him, "Look there. Look at that widow. She has just put in more than all those wealthy people. More than all of the clinkers and clankers." Now, imagine his disciples scratching their heads going, "No way." Imagine Matthew, Matthew the money guy, spent his whole life working accounting. He pulls out his phone, opens up the app, and starts calculating the value of those two coins. Jesus, those two coins add up to just a bit over nothing. It's like less than 100,000th of 1% of what those guys with the Mercedes chariots have been giving. I wonder if Jesus said, Matthew, you've got your figures wrong. Which, I don't know, did that hurt Matthew's feelings in his accounting background? You see, Jesus said, all of those put in out of their abundance. They put in out of what they didn't need anyway. So that, well, maybe with what they were using, they didn't need it. Maybe they could buy a little prestige. But in what she gave, she put in what she had. They gave out of their abundance. She gave everything. Her whole living. At this point, Matthew probably closed up the app, probably even deleted it from the phone, and realized that now he was working on a whole new scale. See, that poor widow gave. No one expected her to. Nobody would have blamed her in the least if she didn't give. And yet she gave. Somewhere in her bleak existence, she dug deep and gave of what she had. Think about her sacrifice for a moment. This gift that she gave into the temple treasury meant maybe not buying that little bit of grain to be able to make that meager meal. She dug deep enough to feel her generosity. In a book by R. Mark Dillon, he writes about something he heard about Warren Buffett. He says, I once heard Warren Buffett say in an interview that he was talking about that $26 billion gift he gave to the Gates Foundation. Do you remember when Warren Buffett did that? $26 billion. Buffett said, my gift has not changed my lifestyle one bit. I still go to the movies I want to go to, and I eat at the restaurants I want to dine at. But what about the person who gives a gift that requires that they can't go to the movies and they can't eat out? Warren Buffett says, they are the true givers. They are the true heroes of generosity. See, what the widow did was the opposite, the exact opposite of what everybody else was doing, is they gave out of their abundance. She did what Warren Buffett is talking about. She was giving enough to feel. Brothers and sisters, that's when you know you are being truly generous, is when you feel it. When you've given enough of your finances, your time, your resources, your gifts, that you feel it. The amount given is not nearly as important as the intention. I mean, think about the scene that we've been talking about at the temple. Can you play the movie in your mind? The religious leaders and the rich made a big show of how much they gave, and it was, kid you not, it was a lot of money. The widow gave a few cents. And yet, which of those two offerings was more valuable in Jesus' sight? It was the widow. Why? Not because of the amount, but because of the attitude. Jesus says, in fact, she's given more than all of those other guys did. Several years ago, the Ad Council, you might not think of, who the Ad Council is, but I'll give you a reminder. Many public service announcements we see on TV down in the bottom left corner might say AD in the bottom of it. AD. That's the Ad Council. They've produced more public service announcements since they were founded in the 1930s than any other organization. We watch them every week. Well, a number of years ago, they had a series of announcements that were entitled Almost. They were 30-second ads about generosity. I want to talk to you about just two of them. So one showed an older woman sitting alone in a room, just staring out the window. The narrator says, "This is Sarah Watkins. A lot of people almost helped her. One almost cooked for her. Another almost drove her to the doctor. Still another almost stopped by to say hello. They almost helped. They almost gave of themselves. But almost giving is the same as not giving at all." Another ad shows a homeless man who is curled up on a pile of clothing with a single sheet over him to try and protect him from the cold. And the narrator begins, "This is Jack Thomas. Today, someone almost brought Jack something to eat. Someone almost brought him to a shelter. And someone else almost brought him a warm blanket. And Jack Thomas, well, he almost made it through the night." Brothers and sisters, our generosity is not about our financial resources, although Jesus does have a lot to say about that. But it's also about our time, our talents, our gifts that God has given us. That's the real stuff we're talking about here. One of my favorite theologians of the 20th century is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. You might guess from his last name, he was a German theologian during World War II who spoke up against Nazism in his day. But one of the things Dietrich Bonhoeffer said was, while grace is free, it is not cheap. We receive grace freely, but that doesn't mean it should cost nothing. I was reminded by Nancy this week as we were talking about the message today, about an episode from King David's life in 2 Samuel chapter 24, right near the end of that book. And King David was returning from battle. I really encourage you to read this story because it's an amazing one. King David was returning from battle in which he actually saw the angels of God fighting on behalf of the armies of Israel. And because he saw God's power on display, he also realized the sin he had committed. And so he was told to go and build an altar in a particular place. And so he goes there, and the owner of that place comes out and says, "O king, I will give you this property to build your altar." Now, the fact of the matter is, David was king. He could have taken it if he wanted to. It was all his anyway. But David said no. In 2 Samuel 24, verse 24, he says, "No, I insist on paying you for it. I will not sacrifice to the Lord my God offerings that," listen to this, "I will not sacrifice offerings that cost me nothing." See, David was going to feel it in order for the sacrifices to mean something. David wasn't going to worship without paying the fair cost to the property owner. If your faith, if your Christianity gives you a warm feeling once in a while, but never touches your wallet, never touches your time, never touches the talents you've been given, then you haven't really been listening to the truth that Jesus teaches. If being a Christian means you don't swear too often, you don't drink too much, as I heard one wag put it, you don't smoke, drink, or chew, or go with the girls that do. If that's your version of Christianity, Oh, everybody's awake this morning. That's good. Look, friends, if that's your version of Christianity, but you're never moved to give more than you really can, you've missed the point. If following Christ means for you saying certain things or believing certain things, but it doesn't mean you're accountable for your belongings or your time or the gifts that God has given you, as much as you are for your actions, then you're only scratching the surface. And if we're honest, many of us spend too much time on the surface of our faith. We enjoy a good faith debate or discussion, depending on how you want to call that. We have feelings for those hymns that mean so much to us. For our favorite project in the church. Oh, for church dinners. But if that's the case, we're only dealing with the topsoil. We're dealing with the outer limits of our responsibility. See, Christ calls us not to topsoil. Christ calls us to dig deep, to go beyond the surface, deeper than just simple answers, beneath our comfort, beneath the confidence that we have that everything is good in the world. Christ calls us to dig deeper. After the last service, I had somebody come up to me and say, Pastor, I've been taught from other pastors that when we give a love gift, if we are truly giving it joyfully, we don't feel it. I said, really? So when you give a love gift, and that word love there is agape, that's a love of action. Christ gave his life out of agape love for us. Did that cost him nothing? But wouldn't you say that was a love gift? And he starts scratching his head a little. He went, oh. I said, see, if you really love somebody, it costs. Any of us who've ever been married or dated seriously know if you truly love someone, there's a cost to that. When we give generously out of our love for Jesus, there is a cost to that. It's something we should feel. And friends, the truth of what Jesus had to say today calls us to dig deep into our attitudes about giving, of our time, of our talents, and even of our treasure. Because sometimes, like that widow, we will realize that all that we have isn't enough. But oddly enough, it becomes more than enough. And by giving up what we think we can't live without, that's when we find true freedom. We talked about this in our Saving Grace class, that the happiest people you will ever meet in your life are the ones who are generous. The ones who live from a scarcity mentality that I'm not sure I have enough are never really happy. Because they're always chasing that little bit more. But people who are generous, who feel it, I defy you to find one who is not one of the happiest people you will ever meet. And beyond that, it's also the response that I guarantee you God will bless. We were talking about at the end of Saving Grace. There's only one time God says, put me to the test. Only once in the whole of Scripture. Only once. And it's when he's talking to his people and he says, so put me to the test in this. Bring in your tithes and offerings and see if I won't bless you even more. Friends, when we talk about giving, we don't talk about amount. We talk about giving generously. Why? Because that's what Jesus teaches us. He certainly did in this lesson today. It's what Paul reminds us of. It's throughout the Old Testament. So as we enter into a season of thanksgiving for all God has bestowed us with, give so you feel. And that's when you know God will truly bless. Amen. I'll take applause anytime.